The illusion of isolation is one of the greatest tricks played upon us by the modern world. To feel alone, to perceive oneself as isolated, is not necessarily to be lonely, and yet we blur the two until they become indistinguishable. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection, a hunger for someone, anyone, to validate your existence, to share your silence, to reflect you back to yourself. But isolation, true isolation, is a construct of the mind, not a condition of being. A woman without friends is not inherently lonely. She is simply placed under a microscope by a world that cannot comprehend her stillness, her separateness. We have been conditioned to see aloneness as deficiency, as a lack, as something unnatural to the human condition. We are social creatures, they say, and yes, we are. There is a truth to that. Humans have always gathered in tribes, communities, and circles of trust to share food, warmth, and stories. But over time, this essential togetherness has morphed into a shallow expectation. We've mistaken presence for connection, companionship for meaning. There is an idea that if a woman does not have a network of friends, something is wrong with her. Perhaps she is strange, difficult, unlovable, or somehow less whole than others. And so society projects this belief onto her as a mirror, hoping she will look into it and recoil at what she sees. But what if the mirror is distorted? What if she sees something far different than what the world expects? Being alone does not mean being empty. In fact, there is a profound richness to being alone that most people will never experience because they are too afraid to sit with themselves in silence. The woman without friends has an opportunity few will ever recognize. She can come face to face with her truest self, without the constant chatter of others, without the opinions and expectations and subtle pressures to conform. She can observe herself without interference. She can listen to the thoughts she usually drowns out with noise. She can sit in the quiet of her being and discover that there is nothing to fear in her own company. But here is where the illusion deepens. We live in a time when solitude is treated like poison. The advent of constant communication, social media, and digital intimacy has trained us to believe that we are only as valuable as the number of people who seek our presence. We live in fear of the unanswered phone call, the empty inbox, the weekend with no plans. A woman without friends becomes a cautionary tale, a shadowy figure the rest of us fear becoming. I don't want to end up like her, we say, as if her existence is tragic. Yet in her solitude, she may be closer to freedom than the rest of us. The irony is that those who fear being alone often feel the most loneliness, for they have not yet made peace with themselves. They are surrounded by people, but still feel unseen, unheard, unknown. To sit in isolation is to peel away the layers of noise we use to mask our fears. We seek friendships not only for companionship, but for protection. A shield against judgment, against insignificance, against that dreadful question, who am I if no one is watching? But a woman without friends must confront that question every day, and in doing so she walks a path others dare not tread. She is forced to reckon with her own reflection, and through that reckoning she learns that being alone is not a punishment, but a profound teacher. It shows her the parts of herself she would have otherwise ignored. It reveals her insecurities, yes, but also her strength. It strips away the performative parts of her identity, the need to impress or please, and it leaves her with nothing but the truth of her being. This is why isolation is so misunderstood. It threatens to dismantle the illusions that keep us tethered to external validation. A woman without friends sees the world differently. Where others see loss, she might see freedom. Where others see emptiness, she might see space to grow, space to breathe, space to simply exist without explanation. And yet the world cannot understand her. The world calls her lonely because it cannot fathom the beauty of a life lived quietly, independently, without the constant affirmation of others. But what if the illusion of isolation is just that, an illusion? What if the woman without friends is not alone at all, but deeply connected in ways we cannot see? Freedom from approval is a concept rarely understood in a world where our worth is measured by the gaze of others. From the moment we are old enough to seek connection, we are conditioned to believe that validation from others is the foundation of our self-worth. We are taught to earn praise, to win affection, to belong. And so it becomes an invisible currency approval, something we trade for security, for acceptance, for a sense of being seen. But this transaction comes at a cost, for the moment you begin to live for the approval of others, You give away your freedom to simply be yourself. A woman without friends understands this. She exists outside the economy of approval, and though the world perceives her as lacking in truth, she may possess something far more valuable, a life unshackled from the need to please. To live for approval is to live in a prison of mirrors. You are constantly adjusting, reshaping, and contorting yourself to reflect what others want to see. In friendships, this often means performing roles: the caretaker, the entertainer, the confidante, the agreeable one. Friendships can be beautiful and life-giving, but they can also demand that you suppress your true nature in exchange for acceptance. Slowly, you lose yourself in the process. You begin to act not from the core of who you are, but from a fear of rejection, a fear of judgment, a fear of being left behind. Approval becomes oxygen, and you become desperate to inhale it, no matter the cost to your soul. A woman without friends, however, occupies a different space. To the outside world, she seems cut off, as though she has failed to play the game. But in reality, she may have chosen to step away from the game altogether. She has chosen not to shrink herself, not to twist herself into something palatable to others. This refusal to perform is unsettling to those who still seek approval, because it reflects a kind of courage they have not yet cultivated. It reflects the possibility that one can be whole without being praised, that one can exist without being constantly reassured. Her aloneness is not weakness, it is a declaration. It says, I am enough as I am. There is great power in no longer needing others to tell you who you are. When you free yourself from the constant craving for approval, you become untouchable. You no longer measure your worth by someone else's perception. Compliments and criticisms lose their grip on you. If someone praises you, it does not inflate your sense of self. If someone rejects you, it does not diminish you. You exist beyond their opinions because you have learned that opinions are nothing more than shifting shadows. They are projections of other people's thoughts, fears, and desires, not reflections of who you truly are. But here lies the paradox: the need for approval is often disguised as love. We mistake validation for connection, applause for affection. It is not enough to be, we must be seen, and we must be liked for what is seen. And so we chase approval as if it will fill the void within us. Yet the void cannot be filled with external praise because its roots lie deeper. It lies in a fear of being unworthy, of being invisible, of being unlovable. A woman without friends confronts this fear directly. She lives in the quiet discomfort of being unseen, unpraised, unvalidated, and in that space, she discovers something extraordinary. She discovers that her worth was never dependent on the approval of others to begin with. It was always there, unshakable, waiting to be acknowledged. To exist without needing validation is not to abandon love or connection, but to redefine it. It means you no longer sacrifice your truth for the sake of belonging. You no longer betray yourself to gain acceptance. Instead, you allow yourself to exist fully, unapologetically, as you are. This kind of existence threatens the very foundation of a world that thrives on conformity. People will look at a woman without friends and assume she has failed to connect, failed to be lovable, failed to earn approval. But what they do not see is that she may have succeeded in the one thing that truly matters: she has freed herself. Approval, after all, is a slippery thing. It can be given, and it can be taken away. If your sense of self depends on it, you will spend your life in a state of unease, always chasing, always striving, always fearful of falling short. The woman without friends, however, has stepped out of this endless pursuit. She has chosen to stop running, to stop performing, to stop proving. She has chosen to simply exist without apology, without explanation, and without the weight of needing to be seen in a particular light. And though the world may misunderstand her, she knows something most people do not. True freedom begins when you no longer seek permission to be yourself. To rediscover the self is one of the greatest and most challenging journeys a person can undertake. The modern world, with all its noise and distraction, has made it increasingly difficult to hear the quiet voice within. We are born whole, untouched by expectation, unshaped by the opinions of others. As children, we exist purely in the moment, in a state of wonder, without questioning who we are or whether we are good enough. But as we grow older, the world begins to place its hands on us. The opinions of family, friends, teachers, and strangers mold us into something more acceptable, more digestible. Slowly, we are shaped by praise and criticism, by what we are told to value and what we are taught to fear. This molding is not always malicious, yet its impact is profound. We begin to lose sight of who we truly are beneath the layers of expectation and the roles we learn to play. A woman without friends, whether by choice or circumstance, has the rare opportunity to strip those layers away. When the external voices fall silent, there is nowhere left to hide. She is forced to sit with herself, to face the person she has become and the person she might yet be. For many, this confrontation is terrifying. To sit alone in silence means acknowledging the parts of ourselves we have long ignored. It means reckoning with our fears, our insecurities, and the quiet desires that we have buried beneath the weight of who we think we should be. This is why so many people fear solitude. It is not the absence of others that frightens them, but the presence of themselves. But the woman without friends learns to hear the voice that has always been there, waiting patiently beneath the noise of the world. It is the voice of her true self, the self that exists beyond labels, beyond relationships, beyond the opinions of others. Without the constant feedback of friends, she begins to ask questions most people avoid. Who am I when no one is looking? What do I love, not because I am told to love it, but because it stirs something deep within me? What do I believe, not because it has been taught to me, but because it resonates with the truth of my being? These questions are uncomfortable because they demand honesty. They demand that we peel away the layers of illusion we have built to survive in a world that rewards conformity. To rediscover the self is not a process of becoming something new, but of returning to what has always been there. It is the quiet recognition of the parts of ourselves we abandoned to belong, to be loved, to be understood. A woman without friends does not have the constant reflection of herself through others, so she must look inward for clarity. This solitude becomes a kind of mirror, one that does not distort or flatter, but reveals the truth. And in that truth, she begins to reclaim what she once gave away. She reclaims her voice, the voice that speaks her mind without fear of rejection. She reclaims her dreams, the dreams that were dismissed as unrealistic or unimportant. She reclaims her boundaries, the invisible lines that say, this is who I am, and this is what I will not compromise. In rediscovering herself, she also begins to redefine what it means to be alone. The solitude that once seemed like emptiness becomes fertile ground for growth. It is in this quiet space that creativity awakens, that new ideas take root, that the deepest form of connection begins to emerge, the connection to oneself. The world tells us that we are incomplete without others, that our value is measured by the relationships we keep. But the woman who has learned to rediscover herself knows a different truth. She knows that relationships are not what make us whole. They are simply reflections of the wholeness we must first cultivate within. In solitude, there is no one to impress, no one to appease, no one to hide behind. There is only the self, raw and unfiltered. It is here, in this space, that authenticity is born. It is here that a woman learns what it means to truly belong not to others, but to herself. This belonging is not something that can be given or taken away. It does not depend on the presence of friends or the approval of others. It is a quiet knowing, a steady grounding in the truth of who she is. While others seek distraction to avoid themselves, the woman without friends has no such escape. And so she walks the difficult path of rediscovery, a path that leads her back to the parts of herself she once abandoned. She learns to embrace her own company, to see her solitude not as a void but as a sanctuary. It is here that she finds freedom, not freedom from others, but freedom to be herself fully and unapologetically. Society has always placed a stigma on solitude, particularly when it comes to women. There is an unspoken assumption that a woman alone, without friends or social circles, is incomplete, perhaps even broken. This belief is deeply ingrained, woven into the fabric of cultural norms and expectations. From an early age, women are taught that their value is often reflected in their ability to connect, nurture, and maintain relationships. A woman surrounded by friends is seen as vibrant, desirable, and successful. She is celebrated for her sociability, for being part of something larger than herself. But a woman who walks through life without such connections is viewed with suspicion. Why is she alone, people ask. What is wrong with her? This is not simply curiosity, it is judgment, born of a world that cannot comprehend solitude as anything other than a failure. This stigma is a reflection of society's discomfort with what solitude represents. To be alone, to exist without the constant reinforcement of external relationships, is to step outside of the structures that society deems normal and acceptable. A woman without friends becomes an enigma, someone who does not fit into the prescribed narrative. The world prefers women who are accessible, who are part of networks and circles that affirm their roles as caretakers, supporters, or companions. A woman who does not rely on these roles, who does not need to be seen as part of a collective, challenges this deeply held expectation. Her aloneness becomes a threat because it suggests that there might be another way to live a way that does not depend on constant social affirmation. But this stigma is not rooted in truth, it is rooted in fear. Human beings fear what they do not understand, and society does not understand solitude. It is a culture that thrives on noise, connection, and validation. We live in an age where being alone has become almost impossible. Technology ensures we are always connected, always available, always surrounded by the illusion of companionship. And yet, amidst all of this connection, many people feel profoundly lonely. They are surrounded by others, but they are disconnected from themselves. They are part of a crowd, but still feel unseen. Solitude then becomes a mirror, reflecting the emptiness that so many are desperate to avoid. This is why a woman without friends is often judged. Her solitude forces others to confront the loneliness they carry within themselves. There is also a deeper societal narrative at play. Women in particular are expected to define themselves through their relationships. A woman is a daughter, a sister, a friend, a wife, a mother. Her identity is often tied to the roles she plays in the lives of others. To exist outside of these roles, to be a woman who does not depend on friendships to define herself, is to reject one of society's oldest scripts. She becomes an outsider, not because she is lacking, but because she refuses to be defined by others. This refusal makes people uncomfortable. It disrupts the illusion that we are only as valuable as the relationships we maintain. A woman without friends becomes a reminder that identity is not something that can be bestowed upon us by others, it is something we must cultivate within ourselves. What is perhaps most misunderstood about solitude is that it does not have to mean isolation. Solitude is not a state of being cut off from the world, it is a state of being deeply connected to oneself. A woman without friends is not necessarily lonely, nor is she without meaning or purpose. She may be deeply engaged with her thoughts, her creativity, and her sense of the world. Her solitude may be a conscious choice, a decision to step back from superficial connections and embrace a deeper form of existence. But society cannot see this. It sees only absence of people, absence of laughter, absence of validation. It cannot comprehend that within this absence there might be a profound richness, a fullness that cannot be measured by the number of people in one's life. This misunderstanding stems from a cultural bias that equates busyness with worth, noise with happiness, and connection with fulfillment. To be alone is to challenge these biases, to exist outside the boundaries of what society deems acceptable. And so the woman without friends is misunderstood, labeled, and judged. Her life is reduced to an incomplete story, a puzzle missing its pieces. But what society fails to recognize is that her solitude is not a void, it is a sanctuary. It is a space where she can explore herself without interference, without the constant pull of others' expectations and demands. It is a space where she can listen, truly listen, to the voice within her that has been drowned out by the noise of the world. The stigma placed on solitude is not about the woman herself, it is about the discomfort she creates in others. She forces society to question its assumptions about connection, about happiness, about what it means to live a meaningful life. Her very existence disrupts the narrative that relationships are the only path to fulfillment, that to be alone is to be less than whole. In her solitude, she holds up a mirror to the world, and what it sees is its own fear, fear of silence, fear of being unseen, fear of the truth that connection alone cannot fill the emptiness within. There is a unique strength that arises from walking alone. In a world that glorifies companionship and measures worth through connection, solitude becomes a quiet rebellion. A woman without friends exists outside the safety of the familiar. She moves through a space where there is no applause, no reassurance, no constant presence to affirm her choices. This might seem like a burden, yet within this aloneness lies a form of power that most people will never experience. It is the power to stand alone, unshaken and undiminished, in a world that expects you to need others to survive. When you have no one to lean on, you are forced to lean into yourself. At first, this can feel like a great emptiness, an echoing void where the noise of companionship once lived. But as time passes, the void reveals itself to be something else entirely. It is not emptiness, but space, a vast and fertile ground upon which you can build something unshakable. A woman without friends is not weighed down by the constant tug of external opinions, the subtle demands to fit into molds others have cast for her. She learns to trust her own instincts, to make decisions without seeking permission or validation. This trust becomes a foundation, an inner compass that guides her even when the world around her offers no direction. To be alone is to confront the self, and confrontation is never easy. Many people fear being alone because it strips away the distractions they have come to rely on. It is easier to lose yourself in others than to face the questions that arise in solitude. Who am I when no one else is watching? What do I value when no one is here to tell me what I should desire? These questions are uncomfortable because they demand an unfiltered honesty. A woman without friends must face these questions every day. She must reckon with her own reflection, the parts of herself she once avoided or ignored. This reckoning is not weakness, it is an act of courage. It is a commitment to knowing oneself fully, even when the truth is difficult to bear. The strength of a woman without friends does not come from isolation itself, but from what that isolation teaches her. She learns resilience not because she is forced to endure loneliness, but because she discovers she is capable of holding herself up. There is no one to soften the blows when life becomes difficult, no one to shield her from the weight of her challenges. And yet she rises. She learns that her strength does not come from others, but from within. The woman who walks alone learns that she is her own protector, her own guide, her own source of comfort. This kind of strength is unshakable, because it is not borrowed, it is earned. The world often misunderstands this strength. People look at a woman without friends and see only what she lacks. They see the empty spaces where others might stand and assume she must be fragile, incomplete, or broken. They cannot see the unseen forces at work within her. They cannot see the quiet determination that has taken root, the sense of self-reliance that grows stronger with every step she takes on her own. Her strength is not loud or performative. It does not seek to be noticed. It exists in the silence of her being, in the calm assurance that she can face the world on her own terms. To walk alone is to free oneself from the need to be understood. Most people spend their lives trying to make themselves known to others, to explain their choices, to seek approval. But a woman without friends learns that being misunderstood is not a curse, it is a form of liberation. She is no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer tethered to the need to be accepted. She becomes her own witness, her own companion. She validates her own journey without waiting for the world to give her permission. This is the kind of freedom that many people spend their lives chasing but never find, because they are unwilling to embrace the discomfort of solitude. Strength is not always born from companionship. Sometimes it is forged in the fire of aloneness. A woman without friends walks a path that is both challenging and transformative. She is forced to build herself from the ground up, to become both the architect and the foundation of her own life. In doing so, she discovers that she is far more capable than she ever imagined. She learns to weather storms without shelter, to find joy without an audience, and to define her worth without comparison. Her strength is not something she wears for others to see. It is woven into the fabric of her being. It is the quiet strength of someone who has faced herself fully and emerged whole. The world may look at her and see only the absence of friends, but what they fail to see is the presence of something far greater, a deep, unshakable understanding of herself. She does not need to be surrounded by people to feel complete, because she has learned to be enough. She has walked the difficult path of solitude and emerged with a strength that cannot be given or taken away. In a world that seeks constant connection, she stands apart not because she is weak, but because she has discovered a power that few will ever understand. There is an unspoken beauty in learning to embrace life as it is, without resistance, without the need for it to look the way others say it should. A woman without friends embodies this truth in a way that few can understand. The world, in its haste to define happiness, wraps it in images of companionship, laughter, and shared moments. It tells us that to be alone is to miss out, to live in lack, to be incomplete. But life, in its deepest essence, does not conform to these ideas. It moves with its own rhythm, free of the definitions and expectations we place upon it. A woman who walks alone has the opportunity to see life not as a performance, but as it truly is, raw, unfiltered, and rich with meaning that goes beyond the surface. To live without friends is to learn to find beauty in the ordinary, in the moments that often go unnoticed. Without the distractions of others, a woman begins to see the world with new eyes. She notices the way sunlight dances on her morning coffee, the way the wind whispers through the trees, the way silence wraps itself around her like a comforting blanket. These small details, often overlooked, become her companions. In them she finds a kind of connection that does not demand anything from her. The world itself becomes her friend, and she begins to realize that life is offering her something precious, an invitation to be present, to witness its unfolding without the need to impose meaning or structure upon it. There is a freedom in letting go of the idea that life must fit into a particular mold. Most people live with an invisible script in their hands, following the rules they have been given. You must have friends to be happy. You must be surrounded to be whole. But a woman without friends has no such script to follow. She exists outside the lines of what is expected, and in doing so, she creates space for something far more authentic. She begins to understand that life does not owe her companionship, nor does she need it to feel fulfilled. This understanding allows her to embrace life in its fullness, without resentment, without bitterness. She learns to accept the world as it is, not as she wishes it to be. To embrace life as it is requires courage, because it demands that we stop running. It demands that we stop seeking something outside of ourselves to fill the spaces within. A woman without friends cannot lean on the noise of others to distract her from her own inner experience. She cannot drown her thoughts in conversation or escape her discomfort through social validation. Instead, she must turn inward and learn to befriend herself. This is not an easy task, for to sit alone with oneself means facing the truths we often avoid. It means sitting with the weight of our loneliness, our fears, and our insecurities. But it is in this confrontation that transformation happens. A woman without friends discovers that the very emptiness she feared becomes the gateway to self-awareness, self-acceptance, and ultimately peace. In embracing life as it is, she lets go of the need to control or fix what cannot be controlled. She understands that people come and go, that friendships blossom and fade, and that the ebb and flow of connection is simply a part of life's rhythm. Instead of resisting this truth, she learns to move with it. She no longer sees solitude as something to escape, but as something to experience fully. Solitude becomes a gift, a chance to see herself clearly, without the noise of others telling her who she should be. She begins to trust that even in the absence of friends, life is still unfolding as it should, offering her exactly what she needs in each moment. When you stop resisting life, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see beauty in places you never thought to look. A woman without friends begins to find meaning in her solitude, joy in her independence, and strength in her ability to stand alone. She no longer sees herself as lacking, but as whole, as someone who has been given the rare chance to live life on her own terms. The absence of friendships, which others might see as a void, becomes a canvas upon which she can paint her own existence. She is free to explore, to create, to live authentically, without the weight of expectations dragging her down. This way of living requires a deep level of trust in oneself, trust in the world, and trust in the unfolding of life. It is a trust that says, I am exactly where I need to be, and I am enough as I am. A woman without friends begins to cultivate this trust, and in doing so, she becomes unshakable. She no longer chases after what others have, because she understands that her path is uniquely her own. The loneliness she once feared transforms into a sacred space, a place where she can hear her own voice and connect with the deeper currents of life. The world may look at her and see emptiness, but she knows the truth. The absence of friendships has not broken her, it has shaped her. It has given her the opportunity to live fully, to embrace life in its raw and imperfect beauty. She understands that life does not need to be filled with people to be meaningful. It does not need to conform to anyone's expectations to be enough. By letting go of what she thought life should be, she has opened herself up to what life truly is, an ever-changing, boundless experience that is hers to embrace.